Hello and welcome to the next episode of Coffee and Comebacks. And today I'm joined by Nick Rothwell. So Nick is the founder of Retribe, which we will go on to talk about more as we go through the conversation. But Nick was a professional hockey player in his previous life, and he used the experience and lessons to bring others together. And to quote Retribe, the power of recovery comes from connection with others. So Nick is going to share with us his very honest and inspirational story. And I have no doubt that you will really connect when you're listening to this today. And I'm really excited about where our conversation is going to go, Nick. So thank you. Welcome. I know you're in the Algarve at the moment, so your backdrop is real. Very jealous, looking absolutely beautiful. But over to you, if you could just share with us, Nick, a real, snapshot into your life so far and who you are.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for having me. I can't believe it's not a virtual background. It's amazing. I am in the Algarve in a place that I've just love and have had a few spiritual experiences at, and I'm really grateful to be here today to be able to share with you. I have my coffee. And I have a story of a comeback, and it all starts, right at the beginning and growing up to two English immigrants who had gone to Canada in the 60s with my oldest sister, who was 2 at the time. This huge heroic move to try to give us a living that my dad couldn't really give us in Doncaster in South Yorkshire. But what I found out is that, he was really doing a geographical at the time anyway. He wanted to just kind of get away from his family and be able to live the life that he wanted to live. And unfortunately, it was a life that was burdened with alcoholism. So at times my household was extremely scary. My parents did the best that they could, but it did get very scary. And I grew up a scared kid, and I used sport as a way to get my father's love and his attention. It also kept me out of the house. So I boxed, I wrestled, I played American football, I played proper football, and I played ice hockey. And it was ice hockey that got me the opportunity to move over to the UK when I was 18, where I had acquired certain skills growing up that were really used to protect myself, but they grew into huge assets where I achieved an awful lot in a very short period of time because I was a great manipulator. And by the time I was 28, you'd say that I'd achieved an awful lot and I was on the road to success. I lived on a flat on the River Thames in Chiswick, and I had a Porsche, and I shopped on Savile Row. I had a beautiful actress girlfriend. I had ownership in a production company, and I had my own TV show on Sky Sports. And I was, like I say, it looked like I was successful, but inside I was that scared 8-year-old boy, and I felt like a fraud and an imposter, and I didn't deserve any of it. And in the nightclub in Soho, someone introduced me to a line of cocaine and a martini. And all those fears fell from me. I could just breathe, and feel normal and feel like I fit in. I felt connected. And it began within about 16 months, I lost everything. And then I started the geographicals. And I, for 15 years, was on this slippery slope to jail, institutions, and almost death, the brink of death. And it was in, that the statement that you said, the power of recovery comes in connection to others. I finally got connected again, and I reached out for help. And I am part of a recovery community that's the cornerstone of the foundation stone of my life today. And I built Retribes to try to help others find community, find connection, and find protocols for transformation in their lives. And I've been free from the constraints of alcohol and drugs for almost 7 years, and life is really beautiful. It's extremely challenging, but very beautiful, and I'm sure we'll get into it over the next little bit.
Wow, and that's amazing how, for a moment there, and I'm sure our listeners will feel it as well, you share with us that deep and probably dark place that you've been, yet very quickly you move to the light, if you like, in terms of, you've taken the good from those experiences and you use that in your day-to-day life. So really keen to explore that. And thank you for being so open and honest, because as you allude to in a lot of the work that you do now, you speak about the perception of masculinity, I think, is effectively how we could probably term it, in terms of men and I've had other speakers on the show as well talk about this, where often it can, not always men, obviously women, we can be the same as well, but often it will be men in that masculine sort of persona that they feel like they need to show and not ask for help. So it would be great to sort of move into that. And before we do, is there anything you wanted to add to that side of things in terms of asking for help and being open from your experience?
Well, I believe it's, as you talk about, let's say, people use the word toxic masculinity. There's a lot of other terms used around masculinity and patriarchy and misogyny. I think it's just an imbalance in masculine traits, and I think that they're deep rooted, in society since post World War II Churchwellian kind of teachings that were taught to, my parents and their parents effectively coming out of the war, and these are in all of our cultures today. Growing up in the Western world, we're grown up with these improper use of our masculinity, and it was those that almost killed me, because I was taught that real men don't ask for help, and this is from my dad, from coaches, from teachers. You can sort out all your own problems, your problems, don't ask for help because it's a sign of weakness. And Sam, it was those two words that came out of my mouth when I was completely smashed, at 45 years old, dying of acute pancreatitis, liver failure, kidney failure. And it was actually the dehydration and the malnutrition that the doctor said was killing me, because my diet was pure vodka and peanut M&Ms. I would have a peanut M&M after a shot of vodka. My mind thought that I was getting the 5 food groups in a peanut M&M and the liquid in the vodka, but I was dying. And I think it was when my ego was so smashed that those two words helped me finally came out of my mouth. And it wasn't, I'd asked for help along the way, but it was normally asking people to lend me money, so I could get food or booze along the way. And people, because people knew me as not a bad guy, I never really kind of did anything to harm anyone particularly. So people did help me out. That actually
Apart from yourself, it sounds as though harming yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, apart from, it's really a slow death suicide what I was doing, and because I didn't care if I woke up dead or alive. But it was in these, and this is why I say I read it on Twitter all the time about what's going on with the Me Too movement and violence, men's violence against young women and girls, or women and girls, and there's always this thing of like, not all men, and there's this thing of privilege of, because it hasn't happened to you or it doesn't affect your life, then it isn't a real issue. And it's because of these perceptions that a lot of, not just men, but women, all of us in the society have grown up with these kind of blinkers around masculinity, masculine traits, and how harmful they really are. And it's really hard to unpick, because a lot of guys will say, hey, I've never been violent towards anybody, but we've been complicit in some way. We've walked by people on the streets while they're wolf whistling at a pack of, as a pack of men towards women, single women, and it's scary for them. And it's specifically in the recovery community, where I've had a lot of women, come up to me and say that they feel unsafe in recovery just because of the way some men can be looking at them. And guys will go, oh, that's not my issue. That's not my issue. But really, it is all of our issues, because, we have to hold each other accountable to becoming more compassionate towards all of us in society, because it's not just women who have had things happen to them, but it's all of us. And we can, through an improper gaze or a comment or an unwanted touch, or we're thinking we're being nice by giving someone a hug, when really we could be activating a trauma in them. And I think it's just being able to be in a place of trying to understand that, and trying to say, hey, I'm going to look at my behaviors and my approaches towards people, not towards all people, because most people have had some kind of trauma, to make the streets safer, to make workplaces safer, to make the sports community more safe, where we're not creating trauma, we're actually helping people deal with past traumas.
Yeah, 100%. And when you spoke there about everyone is carrying some form of trauma, I guess it links back to how open we can be as individuals about who we are. And I think for some people, they feel like, oh, well, that's not something I need to know about. That's very personal to you. And actually, whether you're in a personal, professional environment, you are a person, and they all they all come together. So, you know, I think that's something that is changing in society, actually. You know, in most workplaces, there is more of a move to, we want to work with you as a person and understand what makes you tick. And obviously that's where coaching comes in. You know, you have worked with a number of people in there, not just recovery, but obviously as a professional athlete, you know, coaches will come in to work with you to use exactly that sort of ethos. Just going back to the trauma element. So obviously you have been through so much highs and lows, but in terms of the real challenge and the life event that we're going to focus on in terms of that comeback, how are you going to define that for us today? Where are we going to really focus?
I think I'd like to go back to some of the characteristics that I had growing up. You know, when you're 4 or 5 years old and you see, you know, the man who's meant to protect you and who's doing the best that he can. I do not have any resentments towards my father anymore. I know he was an untreated alcoholic, and he had so much pain growing up, and he didn't have the tools to be able to raise the family, you know, in a way that wasn't going to create trauma. So when I'm 4 and 5 years old and I see that violence towards my mom and my sisters, I pee my pants. And then my coping mechanism was to retreat, to never really get engaged. When kids were playing in the playground, I would sit on the other side of the fence and look in. Then I became very kind of an isolated person, and I would live in my mind. I would always fantasize. And as my fingers grew a little sticky, I would take things. I was a thief, you know, from a very young age. I would go into the corner shop, and even though my mom and dad said that stealing is wrong, Nick, I would nick something. And if I went over to your house and played, and you had a cool little toy, I would take it, and I would tell my mom that I found it in the back alley. And you're growing up, and they find out, and they say, "Oh, he's fibbing." They use these words, fibbing, not lying. I'm just fibbing, and I'll grow out of it, and it's just a phase. But what happens is that when I start to get into these positions, I don't ever admit anything, and I start to weave lies now. So lie upon lie, and I lie when telling the truth would serve a better purpose. So if I tried to make my bed, and my dad came home and said, "Who made your bed?" And rather than saying, "I tried, Daddy," I'd be like, "It wasn't me. It wasn't me," because I was so scared of every reaction from him, and from from everybody, teachers, lying at school. Why wasn't your homework done? Why did you steal those trainers that belonged to somebody else? And it was just lie upon lie, and you start to manipulate, you start to lie, you start to believe your lies, and then you become a lie yourself, and you start have no sense of self. And so those are the things that I really would like people to pick up on, is that if they remember doing things like that when they were a child, and if their children nowadays are picking up those things, they're normally a sign of a manifestation of dealing with some kind of trauma. We might not know what that trauma is. I mean, there's a wonderful doctor named Dr. Gabor Mate, he speaks of trauma not specifically, but a lot in the recovery community, and he'll say that not everybody who has a trauma becomes an alcoholic or an addict, but all alcoholics and addicts have had some kind of trauma. And then he defines trauma as not what happened to you, but what happens to your body as a result of what happens to you. So almost like cellular damage, inflammation, that can cause blocks. There's some work on the polyvagal nervous system and how it becomes deregulated by trauma, so that we no longer trust our instincts, because our instincts become a little bit miswired. So these are the things that we know happens to youth, to teenagers, to most people. And it's about being able to identify certain behaviors that are not, like in recovery, you'd call them character defects, but they're actually defense mechanisms. And we can be kind of looking at that. Why is he stealing? Let's treat the stealing, rather than why is he stealing? Why is he seeking that power? Why does he feel so powerless? Why is he driven by fear that is manifesting this selfish behavior?
The root cause, if you like, of why you're even there. So how did you come to that realization and awareness that these behaviors have manifested over a period of time and led to obviously huge success followed by huge lows, and as you say, sort of near-death lifestyle? How did you start to recognize that you had manifested those behaviors that ultimately needed to change if you're ever to get your life back on track?
I think it started to happen when I was turned 40. At 40, I noticed that my alcohol used to become like I would drink something in the morning. Like I would get up in my flat and Frasier would be on. You know, Frasier's always on Channel 4, and Frasier would pour Niles a sherry. And because it was like 9 o'clock in the morning and I'm watching it, but I see Frasier pouring Niles a sherry on this TV show, I think it's okay for me to have some vodka in my orange juice. And I kind of chuckle at it, and I laugh, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to watch this before it becomes a problem. And I started to look at some really, why was I doing it, and what it was for me is I looked, and it was when I stopped playing the sport that I loved, and I was 28 years old, and I'd lost that accountability of the changing room of the sport, you know, guys who would call me on my BS and stuff. I'd lost that, and I'd become this individual, this silo of self. So I noted at 40 that it was when I stopped playing team sport that I started to just kind of cope with life on my own. And in that time of like about 12 years, you know, I all of a sudden now start to notice that alcohol use is becoming an issue in my life. So it was really that point where I started to become aware of my alcohol use and why was I doing it? Because I never drank or did drugs as a hockey player. I wasn't teetotal, but I would maybe have a beer or two a week. So I was not a heavy alcohol user prior to when I was 28. And then when I was 28, as I mentioned in the beginning, I started hanging out in the nightclubs with guys who were really, really rich, you know, and they became my business partners, and they wore Gucci and Prada, and they drove Aston Martins, and they had American Express gold cards with this little white wrap of cocaine, and I thought it was really glamorous. So then I connected into that world. And I think that was it, is that I was always looking for connection with people, and maybe found it in the wrong people at that time. And then I became, you know, this individual person who tried to sort out all my own problems on my own. But yeah, so in answer to your question, when I was 40 is when I started to become aware. Then when I was 45, and I go through a 12-step program, and in the 12 steps, in the fifth step, in the fourth and fifth step, you really do kind of a house cleaning of your character traits and what you've been doing, how you've harmed people, your fears, how your conduct has been with the opposite sex. And it was in there that I really was like, I'd written down about resentments towards my dad. And wow, you know, like he beat up my mom and my sisters, you know, and I was really scared because of that. And I was writing down why was I scared of my dad? And you shouldn't have a fear of your father. You know, he's meant to protect you. And it really, when I was 45 years old, that it twigged that that was the root cause of my trauma, you know, seeing that happen. And I've been able to, not only in the 12-step program, but also seek other forms of, I wouldn't say therapy, but of healing towards what I saw as a kid.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I'm sure everyone listening will have some form of maybe not trauma, but a way to relate to what you're talking about, whether through their own experience or what they've witnessed, or what they're, you know, who they're trying to be as a parent now, you know. And there's quite a few things there that hit home. One about, you know, parents being there to protect, not to be feared. And you know, that is really important, isn't it? Home being a safe space. And then when you come to safe space, and you know, when you look at the behavioral sides of things, and there's a lot of talk nowadays around psychological safety. And I think that links into what you're saying around retribe and connectivity, where in a team, particularly a high performing team, you create psychological safety. And as you say, you hold each other accountable, and you look to people around you, not just for accountability, but for inspiration. So when that's a good tribe, if you like, a tribe where they're encouraging, should we say, positive behaviors, that has a positive impact. Then when you're in a tribe that maybe encourages negative behaviors, which sounds like a tribe you moved into, more shallow, ego-driven, money-driven, you know, negative spiral, if you like, then you then find yourself in that tribe. So when I sort of look at that and what you do now, is that really how it all came about, when you recognize that actually there's this just innate need for us all to find our tribe? And let's hope, fingers crossed, that for all of us, our children find the positive tribe, we find the positive tribe. You just bring all that together. I think there's a lot to unpick there, but it's obviously something you've given a lot of thought and work to.
It is, and I honestly sometimes I think about the miracles that happen in life. And when I was in Toronto, and I'd found accountability in a 12-step program, I found guys who kept me accountable. You have a common peril in your life, right? You're dying of alcoholism. It's a threat. It's not a common interest. It's a life-threatening peril that you're all bonded with, and it's really unique in 12-step recovery that you come to these meetings because you have this common peril. And then I was like, well, how can I help other people who don't have access to a 12-step recovery, don't qualify for a 12-step recovery? How can I help them find a tribe of accountability? In my recovery, they called it fellowship or unity. And so I thought, I'm going to start this thing, and I'm going to help ex-athletes find accountability again. And initially I called it Reborn, and I tested it with a few people, and people were like, "Oh, Nick, that sounds too religious." And Jeremy Clarkson had put his foot in his mouth, and they all got fired from the BBC. And they started this thing before Amazon called Drive Tribe. And I saw it on the internet, and I was like, "Oh, I love Drive. I love Tribe. I love Tribe." And I just put Tribe. And then I started doing research into the evolution of man and how we are to where we are. I read books like by Sebastian Junger called Tribes. And I read some indigenous books about how people had roles in tribes. And it started to make me really think that how we're fighting tens of thousands of years of evolution in modern society, where we've been compartmentalized into the world of capitalism. We've literally been stuck in these small little flats with phones, and that just contribute to the system. We're literally it's the matrix. We're being stuck in these little boxes, and we're getting hooked up to the internet, and we're just commodities now for big corporations, and we've lost purpose. And that was the big thing for me, was like, wow, in a tribe with normally about 30 people, you had a purpose. You were a hunter or a gatherer or a guard or a childbearer or a wet nurse or a weaver or a shaman, a doctor. You had a role within that tribe to contribute, not just to live, but for the safety and survival of your tribe. So you had
the
value
purpose.
and purpose.
You had a purpose. Yeah.
And now, I was a TV presenter. I was a hockey player. But what purpose was I fulfilling? And for 15 years, I was just a selfish egomaniac who was like killing himself with alcohol. And it was all about me. So I looked at Retribe, and I looked about being able to bring people together through a common challenge. So not just alcohol use, but also breakups, bereavements, divorces, which are different than breakups, change in physical ability, a loss of a job, or financial struggles. And the idea was to put people in these small tribes. And we found that 3 to 6 was a good number for what we call your primary tribe, which is your tribe of ultimate trust, where you're in this group of people, you're accountable to each other, so that you say, let's go to the gym, and one of your buddies is like, no, I don't want to go to the gym. You're like, no, you have to go to the gym. We're a part of a tribe. It's not like let each other down. And then you're like, okay, then. And you get to the gym with your tribe. And so that's what it was, Sam. It's like this whole thing of like, why are we fighting our need to belong? Let's just find places that people can belong. Let's give them protocols that are going to make their lives happier and healthier, and make them be able to flourish in life and fulfill our innate need to have purpose. And that's, when people say, what's Retribe? I'm like, it's in the name. It is literally an honor to our evolution. And maybe ask me about, before this ends, about my beliefs around alcohol and substance use in tribes. And I have a theory on that. So,
right, let's definitely come back to that.
Okay.
And before we do, though, what are the 3 things? So you've already mentioned finding your tribe, But for people listening, and I think you've alluded to there in terms of why you set up Retry, for those life-changing pivot moments, and even if they're not recognised as life-changing at the moment, your path starts to change because of that breakup, because of that divorce, because, you know, and you're there in a point where you've got decisions to make, and actually having the right tribe around you can help you make those decisions. And you've alluded to that, and I'm really looking forward to go more into what it is that Retribe actually does and how it sort of comes to fruition. But what are the other things? So if we say finding your tribe as well, what were the other two things that helped you get to where you are now?
I think a forced upon humility. So which means that I was forced to accept that, and that was through, you know, almost dying, that I needed to ask for help. So this is the other thing, you know, you need to have accountability around you so that people can make you more aware. So you have a group of people say, Nick, you know, like, this is what we're seeing in you. Then you need to accept what they're saying. So trust needs to happen, and you need to be able to ask for help. So I think the other two probably would be being able to ask for help. I think that it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. It's, again, honoring our place as human beings on this planet, is that none of us are gods. You know, none of us are here just to give. We are built to be able to give and receive help. And if we're not receiving help, we're denying somebody their chance to be able to help us. So asking for help is a two-way street. You're not only giving help, you're actually helping someone fulfill their purpose in helping you. So accountability, asking for help, and then you want a third?
If you've got a third.
Yeah, you need some kind of protocol for change. So I think that, you know, for me, the first one I was given was 12 steps. And in those 12 steps, it's a beautiful process of becoming unblocked. And I think that's the thing, is we become unblocked, and we live a life where we have certain tools to be able to help keep us unblocked. And one of those is service towards others. So I think that accountability, being asked for help, and then some kind of protocol for change, transformation. And Sam, you're aware of this. Those protocols are very similar across a lot of different professions, but a lot of them are about being able to recognize a truth. You know, we can live in delusion and self-will. Once we do some writing, you know, do some stuff that whatever our mentor is teaching us to do, we do it. We become unblocked. It's like we get a new pair of glasses. We see things differently. We can go, oh, she didn't leave me. Oh, I pushed her away. Oh, I get it. You know, and why did I push her away? Oh, because I was scared of being alone. So I because of my fear of being alone, manifested delusional thinking that if I pretended to be someone better than I was, she would love me, which brought about like this selfish attitude of entitlement, which brought about these actions of lying and cheating and manipulation. And I can look at my where I was wrong, and I'm like, oh, okay, so, you know, she didn't leave me. I pushed her away. And then you see the truth, and then you can kind of come to terms with trying to fix that. So that's just a great protocol of what 12 steps can give you. But as you, again, are aware, find a mentor who has a similar or a protocol that does be able to see the truth and to stay unblocked. So those are my three things.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you know what's amazing? As you know, I have lots of different conversations, not just on the podcast, but as we all do, with lots of different people in life, whether they're business leaders, sports people, you know, whatever they might be. The themes tend to run true in whatever situation and scenario. And I think almost every person that has been on the podcast actually asked for help has been something that they've pretty much all said as being one of the key elements in different contexts. And sometimes ask for help might be in actually just executing your day job in the best way that you can for the people around you and what you're trying to achieve. For others, it might be asking for help when you're going through some physical challenge or mental challenge, whatever it might be. But I love your reframe of, if you don't ask for help, you're then not giving others the opportunity to give help, because that's something that's fulfilling, again, as part of our just innate need as humans, part of that is to give, isn't it? So I think that's a great reframe, and I think that's what, again, one of the themes that comes through, doesn't it, through coaching, through professional and personal growth. It's how do I change my perspective on this, because I can't necessarily control what has happened, but I can control how I think about it, and therefore how I act and behave. So yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. So what's your headline message then? So obviously we're going to go on to Retribe and into more detail, and I'm really keen to hear your, as you say, your thoughts on alcohol and substance abuse. So maybe you could share that with us now, but also your headline message. So if there's one takeaway that our listeners would take with them today, what would you say it should be?
I think that growing up, we are put upon us these cultural ideologies and pressures of what success looks like, and success looked to me a certain way, that was wearing a really nice suits, a nice car, a nice watch, and very successful, having more money in my bank than I needed. And I think that in doing that, I tried to run my life the way I wanted to do it, to get and obtain those certain things. And that along the line made me deregulated, dysregulated. It made me do things, say things that I truly didn't believe in, because I believed that to be successful, people needed to see me a certain way. And I think the headline thing that I would like people for them to just go look in the mirror and say, am I the person that I'm meant to be? Question, am I fulfilling my purpose? Is by me staying at work for an extra, 3 or 4 hours to bill so much money while I don't pay attention to family or friends or myself, why not give myself some kind of time of love and tenderness to obtain another car? Question. That's the headline thing, is really question whether or not you're fulfilling your purpose. And it doesn't mean that you have to go out and change your job. It just means you need to maybe make a few little kind of adjustments in your life.
Yeah, reprioritization. Yeah, no, I love that.
And I say it, am I the man that I'm meant to be right now? And if I don't feel right, then I try to ask for guidance. But
yeah. And how many people look in the mirror and avoid that question, or even avoid looking themselves in the eye? I mean, I'm sure we've all been there. So go back to your point. You said to ask you about your view on alcohol and substance abuse. Could you share that, please?
Yeah. So the first thing you do when you go into a 12-step recovery around alcohol is people like, you can never drink again. You can't drink. Don't drink. And it's really hard for people to kind of come to terms with that fact of like, I can't ever drink again. And this is where the saying one day at a time is really kind of useful, because you can say, just let's not drink today. But what I found out is I've come up with this theory, and it is just a theory, Sam. So please don't, but I think it's a wonderful theory that I can tell new guys that are coming into recovery is when I was looking at tribes, and I'm really interested in ceremony, and I'm really interested in Mama Earth and ayahuasca and marijuana and psilocybin and DMT and Amaskiri and all of these of this earth. Right, they're mundane things that have been created by Mama Earth, and they were used for tens of thousands of years in ceremony. And these ceremonies where tribes humans were connected to the earth and to the stars, and these, a lot of people, I've never done DMT or ayahuasca, but the people that have done them have said that they felt this connection, and that they feel part of the universe rather than just being a singularity. And I love that. But then and most of them talk about how they purge, and throw up and everything. I was like, wow, maybe like in the because it's a very vulnerable point. You can be, and the shaman needs to look after you. You need people around you to look after you while you're doing these ceremonies. And I was like, why is it that a roughly 10% of the population cannot take mind-altering substances safely? So for me, when I ingest alcohol, I have what they call an allergic reaction to alcohol, which means that my liver doesn't have the enzymes in it. And this is true science fact, right? And you can listen to, there's a couple podcasts that we can mention and put them in the notes that really describe the breakdown of alcohol in the system, and how I don't have the enzymes to break down. I think it's called acetyldehyde, and acetone, which is used to take off your nail varnish. And they send us a signal to the brain of more. So I can't process it. It says to the brain more, more, more. That's why if I have one drink of alcohol, I'm going to have 2, 3, 4, 10. If I'm going to go till I black out or pass out. And I was like, why are we afflicted with this allergy? And then I thought about ceremony, and I thought, what if we're the 10% of the people who in our tribes kept an eye on everybody when they were doing ceremony for saber-tooth tigers, and to make sure that they didn't, like hurt themselves. So I'm like, oh, I'm a guardian. Like I'm a safekeeper of people while they're doing ceremony. So it's not that I can't drink alcohol or take mind-altering substances, it's that I'm not meant to. My purpose is to keep my gaze upon my fellow man, my fellow humans, and making sure they're okay. Mother Teresa had a wonderful saying about alcoholics. She's like, they're my most favorite people because they have this need to be of service and to help their fellow human beings. So that's my theory. Maybe one day I'll do some more in-depth research into it. But my theory is that about 10% of us who have a problem with mind-altering substances, including alcohol, are not meant to be taking alcohol or mind-altering substances.
Wow, what another amazing reframe. And I've never heard that about Mother Teresa's quote. I mean, I guess what I was thinking, not to belittle it in any way, but in our 21st century world, I guess you were meant to be the designated driver. So, that's
yeah, that's it.
The way of protecting.
And not all people who have that reaction to alcohol are alcoholics, by the way, but because I'm sure we all know somebody who once they start, they just don't stop. That doesn't mean that they're alcoholic. There's other elements that you need to be an alcoholic, but certainly one element is this allergic reaction or an abnormal reaction to alcohol.
And this is often the most difficult question, actually, in terms of narrowing down your all-time favorite film. So what is your all-time favorite film and why?
You know what? It has changed over the years, but I was like, when I was in my kind of production company owning stage, I would have said The Godfather 1 and 2 and Scarface and Goodfellas. Like those would have been my up there, kind of, very dark gangstery movies. And then I thought about it really honestly. And the one thing that always keeps coming up is Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I just think it has been like, it's just fun. It's adventurous. It's just, I love I've seen some of the documentaries about how it was made. So some of the stunts, and what they did to make sure that Harrison Ford was safe while he was being dragged underneath a truck. But I just love any of the Raiders of the Lost Ark, the 1, 2, and 3. But Raiders of the Lost Ark is my first one.
Wow, yeah. You are bringing back some memories now. And for those listening that don't know, this is Indiana Jones, by the way, and the song comes to my mind straight away.
There's Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, and the Crystal Skull, which is a very good one. But Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Temple of Doom were the.
I don't know, but you made me want to go back and watch them. And I was in I can't believe I'm actually admitting this, but some people listening will know that I was in a marching band as a child. So I used to run, and on top of that, was in a marching band. That's part of why I joined the military. I love the pomp and circumstance. But I played the trumpet, and I remember us playing the theme tune to Indiana Jones. Exactly. So brilliant. That has made me smile. What's the last book you read or listened to, or a recommendation?
So I am. I have a hard time reading. I'm not a very good reader. I've always been a bad reader, or I've always been a reader who struggled. I read very slowly. But so I was thinking, I'm just reading a book right now on resiliency, and I left it upstairs. I was going to come downstairs and bring it to you, but so I've only just read the first chapter, so I don't want to really get into that because I don't know enough about it. But I get recommendations from someone I'll tell you about. But the last book that I listened to was Jason Wilson's Battle Cry, which is I really got into Jason Wilson, who is a Black man from the United States who, he's been through an awful lot in his life. He's really found power in God. And I love being able to hear those kind of aspects of people's spiritual experiences. But he really, really breaks down what being tender is all about. There's a famous video of him that goes around the internet about a young child who can't break a board, doing karate, and he gets down on his knees, and he's like, "Oh, I can cry about it right now," but he basically says, "I honor your tears, son. I honor your tears." Which is this whole idea of unlearning the fact that young men, young women cannot cry because it's BS. Young men and young women are designed to cry. They have enlarged amygdalas. They have these tear ducts that are meant to pour tears. Let's not deny it. Let's honor it, and let's sit with our children. Let's hold our children, and as they show these emotions and say, "I got you. I got you. What do you need from me?" And so this man is hugely inspirational to me. I listened to the audiobook a few months ago, and I was just like in awe of some of his stories and just how he helps me reframe what a man, what I even hate to say like the terms what a man should be or what a real man is, because the definition is impossible for me to say, but it's enabled me to become more compassionate, more vulnerable, more loving, more caring, especially all the events that have happened in my life over the last 2 years. So Jason Wilson's Battle Cry.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I have seen the said viral video, but I'll definitely do some more research into reading and listening to that. So I've already shared, obviously, a not very interesting fact about myself that not many people will know, but more interested in your interesting fact that's not known by maybe our listeners or many people that know you. So what would that be?
I think an interesting fact would be that my family lineage claims relations to a couple of famous English authors. William Cooper, first of all, who was a famous poet and writer, and he claimed relation to John Donne, who was another famous English literary god. And it was in this knowing or learning that I started to write poetry when I was 14 or 15 years old. And it was an English teacher at school who saw me develop these manipulative tactics and basically said, "Nick, and he said it, he said, do you want to be a bullshitter all your life?" He goes, "You have something in you." And he started to get me to write short stories and poetry. And he got me to stand up in front of classes and read these short stories and poems. And so that would be the thing that I think a lot of people wouldn't know about me, is that I had a dab hand at being a young writer, for someone who struggled so much with reading and writing and spelling. That is something that I would love to be able to rekindle that spark of creativity.
Wow, love that. Well, there you go. Maybe there's that little bit of impetus to do that. Thank you for sharing those. Really insightful and interesting. And speaking of interesting, you've only really touched slightly on your career as a professional hockey player. So, and it is fascinating, and it's one of those sports that not many people will know much about. It isn't necessarily a mainstream sport, certainly not in the UK, although I know it's up and coming and there are more and more sort of clubs emerging. But could you share your career story in terms of not just hockey, but how you moved into it and then your transition out of the sport?
Yeah, so obviously growing up in Canada, hockey is like football in the UK. Everyone just plays hockey. And I started playing hockey when I was like 6 or 7 years old. I was not very good at it. I cried. My dad did not pressure me into continuing, and I had a year off when I was like maybe 8 or 9. And that year off, really, I started playing more outside with a tennis ball against the garage, and I would watch a little bit of hockey on Saturday nights, called Hockey Night in Canada, and I would go outside and I would start to mimic the plays. And it just started this thing inside of me of really getting involved in hockey. And I was above average hockey player, but I was also dedicated to so many other sports that I wasn't one of these guys who's like, I want to play in the NHL. I was a guy who's like, I'm going to use hockey to get me to get a university degree. So I was looking at maybe going to college in Canada, or the States, and then and trying to get some kind of profession out of it. It turned out that hockey was growing in England. And my dad, when I was about 14 or 15, said, Nick, why don't you just try when you're 18, just go over there and see if you can play over there. Now, I had I was pretty good at hockey. Like I said, I was above average. I was a grinder. I wasn't really super talented, but I was hardworking. I got hit when I was a kid, and it was a partial dislocation in my hip, and that created a bit of trauma in my hip. And I was normally a really good skater, but when I tried to play AAA midget, which is you're getting to a high level of hockey in Canada, the coach said, Nick, I'd like to have you on my team, but you've lost a little bit of pace. So you're the last guy to get cut, but I'm sorry, you've slowed down a bit. And I went and played the league below, and I thought I was good. My ego was like, I should be playing AAA. I'm now playing AA. And I remember I had a hard time with my temper, and a coach had given me chastising for a play that I made, and I knew I made a mistake. My head was down. I knew I made a mistake, and he was like, "Rothwell, get on the end of the bench. You're right. You're sat for the next period." And I was already ashamed, but also I was like, "Dude, like I'm one of the better players on the team. I know I made a mistake. You don't need to be like this." And I told him to F off, and he said, get in the changing room." And of course, I shouldn't have said that. And I went to the changing room. I was so mad, Sam, that I took my jersey off. I threw it in the garbage, in the bin, and I was taking down my shorts, ready to pee on it. So that was how bad my temper was, and my ability to control my temper. And when the equipment manager came in and caught me, and I got kicked off the team. But in getting kicked off that team, I was no longer registered to play hockey in Canada. And then when I moved to England, when I was 18 years old, to play in England, you have, as a Canadian, you have to be an import. But they didn't see my minor hockey report registration for that year. So technically, I was not. I didn't learn my hockey in Canada. I learned it in the UK. So I didn't play in the UK as an import. I played as a British player, which made my value rise because I wasn't as good as an import would be, but I was also above average in the UK hockey player. So I was quite well sought after, and I ended up playing with the biggest team in the country at that time in the early '90s was the Sheffield Steelers, and I played with them for a season, and then university came calling, and I started playing on the Isle of Wight, where we just won everything. We didn't lose a game. And that's when I think was the most magical time of my hockey career, was playing on the Isle of Wight for the White Link Raiders with guys that today are my brothers, that have these bonds, but we were untouchable and we broke records. And that really gave me this taste of like, wow, I've accomplished some stuff in hockey. And then I went up to a league above that and played in Guildford in my last year of university. And I had a funny thing enough, a coach who was not a really good man manager. And he really I started that year off really well. And he had me on the first and second line. And then I made a couple of mistakes, and I beat myself up a lot as an athlete. I'm like, okay, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. And rather than build me up, he just tore me down. And that kind of started to end the spark of my interest in hockey. And it did with a lot of other guys too. I have a couple of good friends who are like, I can't be bothered with this guy, and they actually quit playing hockey. And shows the importance that I've learned now in coaching about how, it's not necessarily the results on the ice. You need to be able to be an athlete-centered coach and treat athletes as individuals. And then Sky Sports started covering the hockey. And I talk about these manipulative tactics that I had that would get me a lot of stuff. Like the first job I ever had in the UK was at an ice rink. And I went down to the ice rink and I said, can I have, are there any jobs? And they said, well, yeah, we need someone to drive the Zamboni, which is the machine that cleans the ice. And they said, do you know how to drive one? I said, of course, I'm Canadian. Sam, I didn't know where the key went in the ignition, right? I just seen these things go around and around the ice all my life.
How hard can it be?
This lie gets me this job. And it was the same thing with Sky, is that I was doing English literature at Winchester University. And this is in the time when I watched them make a show, and I thought the producer's name was Trisha Tolchard. So the very next day, I phoned up Sky Sports, and this is when you could get through switchboards. I said, "Can I speak to Trisha Tolchard, please?" And she answers her phone. I said, "Hi, Trisha. My name is Nick Rothwell. I'm playing hockey for the Guildford Flames. I'm doing a media class at university. Can I come and watch you make a program?" Now, you know that that's a lie, but this lie gets me a foot in the door. And I go watch them make a show, and I actually help them a bit, some of the names of players. And nothing came from it. And I ended up getting a job in Westminster, with a like doing sales with a Westminster publication. And then that hockey season started the next year, and 2 games into the season, they were not happy with one of their team on Envision team on the show, and Trisha phoned me up on a Tuesday, and I was in this. It was my first week at work, and I hated this job. And she said, "Nick, can you come in and meet this guy Mark Sharman, who's about this Sky Sports?" And and I said, "Yeah." And I went in on the Thursday. He met me. He said, "Nick, do you want this job? It's the rinkside reporter. It's X amount of money per day, which is more money than most of the guys were getting paid in that league." He says, "If you want it, you start on Saturday." I said, "Can I watch a show being made first?" He said, "No. You want it? You have to say yes or no now." And I said, yes. So my hockey career, I ended up playing another season while I was on TV, but it started to wane. And I went full into becoming a TV presenter for Sky Sports. And in that time too, I'd started a little company which became a big branding company, one of the biggest branding companies in the world today. And also I started a little production company with another big ad agency. So I was a bit of an entrepreneur, hockey player turned Sky Sports guy turned entrepreneur, all in the space of about 4 or 5 years. That's the exciting time of my career. Not exciting. It was exciting, but it was kind of a very busy time in my careers.
Yeah, and I can see the spark in your eyes when you speak about it. There's obviously just lots of good memories, and you just want to touch on what you say about lies. And obviously, if you could go black and white, you would say, okay, so you didn't tell the truth, you used a lie to get through the door. Equally, on the other hand, some would say you were innovative and you said, right, how am I going to, get that sort of exposure? So by saying I'm doing a media, so not obviously condoning lying, but saying that sometimes it demonstrates, as you say, on the one hand, you can say that's manipulative. On the other hand, you can say you had that ingenuity. And as your teacher said a long time ago, something in you. And whether you see it as BS or an ability to get further. But yeah, I mean, I think you highlight a lot of things there. And actually, what's interesting, that it's like many things, isn't it? You can fall into things when you transition from any career, but particularly sports and military. And as you know, I have a lot of conversations, and we really do focus on the show around sports and military and business, and how they sort of bring together or come together and bring the lessons through. There's effectively, how do you transition? And for many, they can't picture what life looks like outside of that tribe, outside of the environment they're in. So it just means that they can often just find themselves along a path, and sometimes that's negative and positive. And it sounds like you had a yin and a yang, based on what we've spoken about first. Now, just on that, could you give us more insight into Retribe and how you've already talked about how it was born and how it came to fruition, but if I were coming to engage with you now and coming to engage with Retribe, what sort of personal organization might I be, and how would we engage, and what is the purpose and the nuts and bolts of what you do, I guess?
It has evolved a lot from, like I say, from being this thing of like connecting ex-athletes together to give them accountability and then give them suggestions on places to go, to what it is today. And we operate as a CIC, which is a community interest company, because I wanted to have some ethics around the business. I didn't want to just be known as a company that wanted to sit here and make a ton of cash and to to have a buyout, to have an end plan of like building this up and then exiting as a startup, which most startups are nowadays. I wanted to have some kind of moral values, and it has evolved a lot because I moved back to London 3.5 years ago, and I I wanted to basically just to build Retribes as a, from what it was when I started in Toronto. And my idea was to go into corporations and to help corporations with wellness programs. And this was right at the beginning of lockdown. So we landed one of the, Zoom, fastest growing tech company on the planet. And we learned a lot about, being able to provide safe spaces for people to be able to talk, as well as providing workshops. And what I've learned over the last 3 years and coming out of lockdown is that people are tired of doing workshops. They're kind of like HR departments are inundated with companies saying, "Hey, let's do a workshop on building boundaries," or senior leader management courses, or love language and this kind of stuff, like the proper use of language in corporate environments. And they're very, very helpful, but nobody really wants to take part in them. And I think that the uptake on these workshops nowadays is under 1%. So a lot of companies are coming in and saying, "Hey, let's do this workshop. It's going to cost you X amount of money," which is normally quite high figures, and nobody wants to take part in them. And then it made me really think about what Retribe is this accountability creator. So we now go into companies and we say, "Hey, what we've learned along the way is that people just want to become better friends with the people that they're working with. So that you're not necessarily just going to work for a paycheck. You're going to work because you have purpose in your work, but you also have this little group of people around you, and they might not be from the same department as you. So if you're in the accounting department, instead of just being friends with your other accountant folks, you're actually becoming friends with, someone in marketing, someone in sales, someone in office management, reception. You're becoming through the floors friends. So different departments, and then we have this 8-week course. They're called Critical Conversations, and they're based on resiliency and being rooted and strength-based learning, self-awareness. They're based on a topic, and people just are led with a sprinkling of psychology. That's what my business partner talks about. Her name is Dr. Misha Jarvis. She just delivers a little sprinkling of psychology, and then that creates these bonds and these connections through these conversations that are skillfully led by myself and trained psychologists. I've learned to listen and lead, not just hear people, but be able to pick up on certain things. So it's not just like a copy and everyone can kind of talk, although those are very useful too. But there's just skillfully led conversations that build these connections. So that when we have this one program that has been written called Tough Through Tender, and this is more in depth workshops that happen through these conversations. So on a workshop on resiliency or self-awareness or being rooted, and then these are done in person. And we provide this in corporate environments, but also in sport world, because we understand those environments. So in a nutshell, what we do is we help build community in corporate and sport culture, so that we can then offer this program, this protocol for change, that helps people change perspective, helps people communicate, help people heal. I think that's the other thing, is we go into work thinking this is a place where I have to make money, when actually it can be a place to come in and heal. And I think that when corporations hear that it's not just, we're not just going to increase your productivity and your bottom line by doing these workshops, we're going to, the people who work with you are going to be able to heal any things that have happened to them. I always say we're like comets coming into work. We come in and we're this shining beam of stuff, but we've got this tail of trauma, fear, judgment, unworthiness,
and stuff that might be happening in the background that we feel like we're meant to drop at the door. Yeah.
Exactly. And so someone just, I'm 32 years old. My girlfriend just breaks up with me. I need to go to work, and I'm fighting back tears, but I don't feel safe enough to say to my team or to people who I work with, guys, my heart is broken. Please hold me today. And because that's a sign of weakness, or you can't be shown, and I'm gonna snap at somebody. I'm gonna be improper with somebody. I'm going to not be able to contain my emotions or express my emotions in a certain way. So really, this is what we want to try to do. Is we want to try to, what we are doing is creating environments and cultures where we can undo these old hierarchical, power down driven, patriotic, misogynistic environments. And I'm not being harsh. This is just the reality that we live in.
I was going to say, you're being realistic, having,
yeah,
worked in the corporate world.
And you can't, and people who sit there and say that oh, my company's not like that. I'll say, when was your company built? Who built it? What was it built upon? And it's like not, and this is the thing, is like, you think about a company like a skyscraper, there are structures, floors of glass and harshness and I-beams and insulation and tough stuff, right? Not really kind, movable ecosystems that can be fluid and flowing. So we need to go in and we need to start unpicking some of this scaffolding in these corporate and sport culture. And that means challenging these old ways and saying, hey, did it really work? When your company was built in the 90s and there was a huge economic boom and really you could charge 20,000 pounds for something that you can only charge 1,000 pounds today, and this huge economic flush came into your company, so do we need to be at our desks at 8:30 anymore in the morning because our competitors are at work at 9? And undo all of these kind of these learnings, because they didn't really work at the time. It was just the way that the economy was, and they certainly don't work today. We're not being harsh. We're just being real, and we're trying to be more human centered, which we know creates environments of where people can really flourish. And we're looking, Sam, at tapping into something that hasn't been tapped into before. And I think that it's more needed now than it ever has been. So the companies that we're endeavoring to work with are the companies who are willing to kind of just challenge themselves, say, hey, you know what? Just like I said earlier about looking in the mirror, can your company look in the mirror and say, are you actually fulfilling your purpose? Are you actually not creating any harm or trauma? And so companies who are curious to real change, not just band-aid, lip service, we're eco-friendly type change, real change,
Yeah, and what's amazing but also difficult, I think, about the economic environment that we all find ourselves in now is that we are all held more accountable. So if you take, we're looking at obviously COP27, it's been ongoing at the moment, and really that they hold that so that they can hold companies accountable to what they say that they're going to do. Obviously, there's been a lot of press around greenwashing and people saying, oh, we've got a 30% target to support women on boards, yet they're still not supporting women's development to get them to the board. There's a lot of talk in the economic environment to, as you say, just unpick and not necessarily in a critical way of saying you should never have done it like that, because the reality is companies have grown and individuals have grown in the environment. They've adapted to the environment that they're in. And the reality is now that, evolution and adaptation is just happening quicker and quicker. When I think during the pandemic, there was a quote that said, we've been through 10 years of technological advancement in 1 year, in terms of looking at how companies and individuals have had to just evolve how they work. And so I guess the point of my sort of observations and then therefore question is, what's the appetite for businesses to engage from what you're seeing to take that look in the mirror and say, we're not just going to say these things, we want to take action and put some structure around how we change for the better. What do you think that appetite looks like at the moment?
I think people are sticking their toe in the water and they're trying to test it. They're trying to figure out, like, if we go down this route, are we going to undo everything? Are we going to fall apart as a company? And that's particularly too in sports culture, is that they're so stuck on these winning mindsets. What is a winning mindset? How much harm is that creating? Why can't we just have a challenge mindset? Why do we have to win everything? So people are like, you go into top level elite football clubs and you talk to them about vulnerability and compassion, and they're just going to laugh you out the door. More in the corporate world, people are starting to dip their toe in it. But again, I think that when they're so scared of the bottom line, They're like, what happens if we create a bunch of people who, in their words, would become, we're creating soft people, when I would be you're creating resilient, compassionate, kind people, is not creating soft people. But that's just what a lot of people hear. So these are the barriers that we have to lower are around language and how we actually show people that this way is more beneficial, not just for the people, but for your business. So I think that the appetite is there. I think people just, it's almost kind of like you as a person, when you're sitting there and you're feeling a little restless and then a little uneasy. What should I be doing? Should I be going for a walk? Should I be cutting out this type of food? Your intuition is so, oh, I wish we could, like, it's this truth that we just need to learn how to listen to. And I think that companies are starting, their intuition is bubbling away. Something needs to change. But what do we change? So we go in with a very soft approach. Like I say, it's just based around conversations. And then we can start listening more and giving that feedback to how a corporation can become more compassionate and vulnerable. So I think the appetite is there. I think we just need the hard bit is, how do you make it come across to people, and I think that especially when so many people who are selling these products, I'm not saying there's charlatans out there, but there are a lot of people out there who charge ludicrous amounts of money for keynote speaking and for these presentations, like tens of thousands of pounds, that really do elevate people for a day or a week, but they're not in there, like, and this is what we need to do, is we need to consistently, softly power up people, power up corporations, instead of power down and inspire for a day or a week.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, change takes time. And I always say, whether I'm working with individuals or companies, it's normally about those tweaks, those adjustments along the way that get you to the point of transformational change, rather than saying, right, we draw a line. And I mean, it's virtually impossible unless you're a company of one. And even if you are a company of one, even then, just doing a complete U-turn on how you, and often people are doing things. There are things they're doing well. There are things that, companies and people are doing well, but there are things that they could be doing better, or things that maybe they could remove, and they would take things, that they're a blocker. So how do you remove the blockers? And one thing that really resonated is about the how. I don't know about you, but what I think you're right around the appetite, that there's the why. A lot of people are aware of the why. A lot of companies, a lot of teams are aware of the why, that they're restless, why they feel that there may, need to be some element of change. Some are even aware of the what might need to happen to do that. But many struggle with the how. Many struggle with, how do we actually identify, implement, bring people with us, create those teams, break down the silos that are so often apparent. And again, I'm sure that's where Retribe really comes in. It's that how, isn't it? It's getting alongside. Yeah. As you say, that takes time. That's not a keynote speech. That's not coming in on a one-off. That is creating a relationship, a connection for the longer term to bring about change.
Yeah, and trust in the ability for your company to have hired the people that it's hired. And I think that's the thing, is the how comes from within. You've spent, everyone you've hired is an expert in what they do. Trust them, and instead of bringing people in to run these workshops, let them run the workshops. They know their department better than anybody else, but give them the voice, give them the platform, and give them the confidence and the resiliency to be able to do that. So I think for us, what we do is the how is in you. We just help flush it out. You don't need externals coming in and doing all of this stuff. Like, let's work together and bring it out of people that you've already spent all this time and money on. And then obviously, and what that can do, Sam, is it can weed out people who don't really want to be there. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's a subject we could talk about for a long time, but I'm conscious that it's time for us to start to wrap up the conversation. And I always like to finish on a high. So It would be great to understand. And again, I know it can be really difficult to pick out one thing. So if you feel like one thing is too difficult, but if you were able to sum up either your greatest achievement or achievements, what would that be?
Getting sober. And the most beautiful thing in life is to have found a purpose in my sobriety, and to understand that I'm not just, I am a human on this planet that's designed to help a certain amount of people, a particular type of person, and to realize that I need to be a part of rather than the center of. And I tend to always, not always, but sometimes I'll end my talk, Sam, on about where I reference this documentary series that I saw on Netflix. It's now on YouTube, and it's called The Pyramid Codes. And it's this low budget documentary series, 6 1 hour ish episodes. And it's just about the history of the pyramids, and they challenge these ideas around when the pyramids were made, and they talk about sacred masculine and sacred feminine energies, and I learned a lot about it. And they also, there's the woman who narrates it, she there's just this bit where she notes the Egyptian hieroglyphs, and she says, note the hieroglyphs, all of the gods have left hands. That's because the left hand is for bestowing, it's for giving, and only gods give, they don't receive. And I was watching in my bed. I went, I got a left hand, but I also got a right hand. And what's that for? All the right hands for receiving. So if the left hand's for bestowing, the right hand's for receiving. If I'm not using them equally, I'm not flowing. And just sit there and realistically go, we are humans on this planet. There's nearly 8 billion of us. We all have left hands and right hands. If you put out your left hand and you think of someone that you can help today, you can do it if you want. Go on, put out your left hand. Now just think of someone you can help today. We should, you're right. And then you think of your right hand and you go, what's something that I really kind of, and you hold it down like that. And you think of like something where you can ask for help with, like, what do you need some help with in your life? And who can you ask for? And then you just kind of just grab a hold of that. And what immediately happens is we're connected. We've become like a channel or chain style connection in humanity, where you're in England, I'm in Portugal, and we're connected in the knowing that we are here to give and to receive. And in that, we've just become this channel of love. And I think love is action. And action is being able to give something to somebody without anything with any expectation in return, and also to be able to receive that with no expectation of having to give anything back by receiving it. That's my kind of end thought, if that makes any sense.
Nick, that's an amazing way to end the conversation, because I don't think I would do it any justice to share my thoughts on that. But certainly, as I've grown through experience and time, I think one of whether it comes through maturity or whether it's a journey that we all go on, is recognizing that there isn't always, it doesn't have to be two-way in every interaction, i.e. sometimes you do just need to give without any expectations, because everyone will have moments in their life where they can only receive, and that at that moment they need to receive. But I'm a great believer in what goes around comes around. And so thank you for not just your final thoughts, and I'm sure we'll all take something with us from that, but everything that you shared with us today. We'll include, as you say, some links in the notes, not just to your website, but some of the elements that you've mentioned there, so around the books and the films, etc. So if you want to find out more, then do go ahead and reach out to Nick. Nick, have you got any closing thoughts or anything you'd like to say before we sign off? And thank you, by the way.
I would just like to thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I know we linked up on LinkedIn, and I love the work that you're doing. And I remember, like, when we first talked, it's like, how are we going to be able to work together? And it's just kind of, we are. Sometimes I think it's in the not knowing is beautiful, and just letting the universe kind of guide relationships and people who come into your life. Because I do believe that if you are open, if you do wake up in the morning and you do have a protocol, just to ask for guidance and to say, and I say, universe, mold me into the man that you would have me be. Because, I tried for 45 years and I didn't do a great job of it. And since I do that surrender and I just try to be molded, people come into my life for a reason. So Sam, I'm grateful that you're in my life, and I'm really grateful to see us, on this journey over however long it takes for us to be able to maybe meet face to face for some coffee, but also maybe to be able to collaborate on some stuff as well. So I'm just very, very grateful for this chance to chat with you more. So thank you.
Well, that would be brilliant, and I'm looking forward to that as well, Nick. So enjoy the rest of your time out in Portugal, and looking forward to catching up soon. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you.